This is a story from a time in my life I've tried hard to forget, but some things you can't bury. The events are real, the pain was real, and in the end, so was the victory. The first thing I saw when Sasha crashed my baby shower wasn't her smug, perfectly made-up face, but my grandmother's locket nestled against her throat. It was a perfect Boston afternoon, the kind of crisp, sunny day in early May that makes you forget winter ever happened. We were in the courtyard tea room at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, surrounded by towering floral arrangements of peonies and hydrangeas, the soft clinking of porcelain, and the happy chatter of 30 of my closest friends and family. My fiancé, Liam, was supposed to be there, beaming by my side as I sat on a plush velvet armchair, a mountain of pastel-wrapped gifts at my feet. But he'd called an hour before, his voice a smooth balm of regret, saying a client emergency had pulled him back to his office in the financial district. He promised he'd make it up to me. He always did. The locket, a heavy, gold, intricately engraved heart my grandmother had worn every day of her life, gleamed under the soft lights of the chandeliers, catching the light as Sasha paused dramatically in the doorway. It was lying on skin that wasn't mine, a sacred piece of my history turned into a trophy for my fiancé's ex-girlfriend. And in that one shattering moment, I knew the client emergency was a lie. Everything was a lie. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The room fell silent in waves, the happy chatter dying as heads turned, first toward the uninvited guest, and then, with pitying, horrified glances toward me. My sister Clara was the first to react, moving to intercept Sasha with the protective fury of a guard dog. But Sasha simply smiled, a placid, condescending little curve of her lips, and held up a perfectly manicured hand. "Don't worry," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent room. "Liam invited me. He wanted to make sure I felt included." Her eyes met mine, cold and triumphant. Included. The word was a poisoned dart. She took a deliberate step forward, her hand going to the locket, her thumb stroking it as if it were a pet. My locket, the one Liam had taken from my jewelry box 2 weeks ago, promising to have the clasp professionally repaired before our wedding. He'd told me it wasn't ready yet, that the jeweler was an old-world artisan, and these things took time. I saw the timeline of his deceit stretch out behind me, a dark and tangled road I had been blindly walking. The late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls he'd walk into another room to take, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his suit jacket last week that he'd blamed on a huggy client. Each excuse, each placating smile, was another brick in the wall he'd built around his betrayal. My mother, a woman who prided herself on Beacon Hill etiquette and unflappable grace, looked like she might faint. My friends stared, their mouths agape, and I just sat there, frozen in my velvet throne, the weight of my unborn child a heavy, grounding presence in my belly. The shower, my perfect day, had been turned into a stage for my own public execution. Sasha's eyes scanned the room, drinking in the shock and discomfort, before they landed back on me. "Chloe," she said, the name sounding like an insult on her tongue. "You look tired. Pregnancy must be so draining." It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a perfectly delivered blow wrapped in a veneer of concern. She was telling everyone in that room that she was still a fixture in his life, so important that he would give her my most precious heirloom, so powerful that she could walk into this sacred space and stake her claim. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands, resting on my swollen belly, began to tremble. This wasn't just about cheating. This was about desecration. That locket held the last photograph ever taken of my grandmother, a tiny, faded image of her smiling. It was my connection to her, my good luck charm, the physical embodiment of my family's love. And he had given it to her. He had taken my past and handed it to the woman he was building a future with behind my back. Clara finally found her voice. "Get out!" she hissed, her voice low and shaking with rage. "Get out right now." Sasha just laughed, a light, airy sound that was more chilling than a scream. "I'm just here to drop off a gift," she said, placing a small, elegantly wrapped box from Neiman Marcus on the table nearest the door. "From me and Liam, we do hope it's a boy." And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving a crater of silence in her wake. The locket swung gently as she moved, a golden pendulum marking the end of my life as I knew it. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then my mother burst into tears. The spell was broken. The room erupted in a flurry of whispers and worried movements, but I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was the frantic, panicked drumming of my own heart. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I didn't say a word. I walked past the gifts, past my crying mother and my furious sister, out of the tea room, through the opulent lobby of the hotel, and into the harsh afternoon sunlight. I didn't stop until I was back in our brownstone, the one I had so lovingly designed, the one that was supposed to be our family home. The silence inside was deafening. His scent was everywhere. His cologne, the leather of his briefcase, the faint smell of the expensive whiskey he liked to drink. I walked into our bedroom, the room where he'd kissed me goodbye that morning and told me he loved me. I pulled my suitcases from the top of the walk-in closet and started packing his things. Every bespoke suit, every cashmere sweater, every handmade Italian shoe felt like a prop from a play I'd been tricked into performing. When his key turned in the lock 3 hours later, I was sitting on the sofa in the living room, surrounded by his packed luggage. He walked in, smiling, holding a bouquet of my favorite white roses. "I am so sorry, baby," he started. That meeting was a nightmare. I raced back as fast as He stopped when he saw the suitcases. The smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of carefully managed confusion. "What's this? Are you going somewhere?" His feigned ignorance was more insulting than the affair itself. "Sasha came to the shower, Liam," I said, my voice eerily calm. "She was wearing my grandmother's locket." For the first time since I'd met him, Liam's composure cracked. Just for a second. A flash of pure panic in his eyes before the mask of calm, reasonable charm slipped back into place. "Oh God. Chloe, honey, it's not what you think," he said, rushing forward, dropping the roses on the floor. She wasn't supposed to. She twisted the story. I lent it to her because the clasp on hers broke, and she had a big event. It was a stupid mistake, but that's all it was. He reached for me, but I flinched away. "You let her wear my grandmother's dying wish around her neck as a fashion accessory?" I asked, the calmness in my voice starting to fray. "It's an heirloom, Liam, not a party favor." "You're overreacting," he said, his tone shifting, a hard, dismissive edge creeping in. "You're pregnant, you're hormonal. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. Sasha and I are just friends, you know that." It was classic Liam. Twist, deny, and then blame my emotions. Make me the unstable one. But the image of that locket on her skin was burned into my mind. It was a brand marking me as the fool. "I want you to leave," I said. "Don't be ridiculous, Chloe. We're getting married in 6 weeks. We're having a baby." "The wedding is off," I said, the words feeling both impossible and completely liberating. "And I don't want you here tonight. Your things are packed." He stared at me, his jaw tight with fury. The charming fiancé was gone, and in his place was a cold, cruel stranger. "Fine," he spat. "Have your little tantrum. You'll call me tomorrow when you've come to your senses. You always do." He grabbed his suitcases and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back, his eyes like chips of ice. "You're making a huge mistake. You and that baby are going to need me." He slammed the door behind him, and the entire brownstone seemed to shudder. I sat there in the silence, the scent of the crushed roses filling the room. He was wrong. I wouldn't be calling him tomorrow. I wouldn't be calling him ever again. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a declaration of war. And as I sat there, a single cold tear tracing a path down my cheek, I knew that simply leaving him wouldn't be enough. He had humiliated me. He had desecrated my grandmother's memory. He had tried to break me. I wouldn't just cancel the wedding. I would cancel him. I just had no idea yet how deep his deception ran, or how powerful the forces were that I was about to go up against. All I had was a broken heart and a flicker of rage that was quickly growing into an inferno. The first week was a blur of grief and logistics. Canceling a 6-figure wedding is a special kind of hell. Every phone call to a vendor, the florist, the caterer, the string quartet, was a fresh humiliation, a forced retelling of my failure. Liam, true to his word, didn't call. He was waiting for me to crawl back, to apologize for my hormonal outburst. His silence was a tactic, designed to make me feel isolated and desperate. His parents, Robert and Eleanor Vance, pillars of Boston society, called once. It wasn't a call of concern, but of command. Eleanor's voice was clipped and cold, informing me that I was embarrassing the family, and that whatever little spat Liam and I were having needed to be resolved immediately, and, more importantly, quietly. When I told her the wedding was definitively off, the line went dead. The Vances had circled the wagons and I was on the outside. But as the initial shock subsided, something else took its place: suspicion. Liam's explanation about the locket felt too thin, too rehearsed. The way Sasha had behaved wasn't the action of a woman in a casual fling. It was the move of a queen reclaiming her throne. There was a deeper story here, and a cold knot of dread in my stomach told me I wasn't going to like it. My career as an interior designer had taught me one thing: the most important elements of a structure aren't the ones you can see. It's about the foundation, the wiring, the plumbing, the hidden network that makes everything else function. Liam's life, I was beginning to realize, was all facade. It was time to look at the wiring. It started with our finances. We had a joint account for the house and wedding expenses. I logged in, expecting to see the healthy six-figure balance we'd built together. It was half empty. I scrolled through the transaction history, my blood running cold. There were dozens of withdrawals, all made by Liam over the past 6 months. Thousands of dollars at a time, sent via wire transfer. But the recipient wasn't a vendor. It was a numbered LLC I'd never heard of: Triton Holdings Group. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just the money. It was the calculated, methodical nature of it. This wasn't impulsive. It was a plan. While I was tasting wedding cakes and picking out nursery furniture, he had been systematically draining our shared future. I spent the next 3 days fueled by coffee and a cold, simmering fury, digging into every corner of our digital life. I was a ghost in my own home, sifting through the ashes of my relationship. I went through old bank statements, credit card bills, even the easy pass toll records for his car. A pattern emerged. Twice a week, for the last 8 months, his car had gone through the Callahan Tunnel and out toward Logan Airport, but there were no corresponding flight purchases on our credit cards. Instead, there were charges at high-end seaport hotels. The Intercontinental, the Envoy, always on a Tuesday or a Thursday afternoon. And then I found it, buried in the archived files of our shared cloud storage, in a folder mislabeled Old Tax Docs, was a subfolder titled Triton. My hand trembled as I clicked it open. Inside were legal documents, incorporation papers for Triton Holdings Group LLC. And the names of the managing partners were listed in black and white: Liam Vance and Sasha Petrov. The air left my lungs in a whoosh. It was so much worse than an affair. An affair was a betrayal of the heart. This was a conspiracy. Triton Holdings was registered 6 months ago, right after we got engaged. They had been building a separate life, a separate financial entity, with my money, with our money. They were using me as a seed investor for their new life together. The hotels, the dinners, the secret company, it had all been happening right under my nose. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the edge of my desk. How could I have been so blind? Liam was a wealth manager at his father's prestigious firm, Vance & Associates. He handled the fortunes of some of Boston's richest families. He radiated competence and trustworthiness. His entire persona was built on it. But the man who signed those documents, the man who stole from his pregnant fiancée, was a common thief in an expensive suit. That night I couldn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, the glow of the computer screen illuminating the evidence of his treachery. The love I'd felt for him had curdled into something dark and unrecognizable. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had tried to ruin me. He thought I was weak. He thought my pregnancy made me vulnerable and dependent. He was counting on me to fall apart, to accept whatever scraps he threw my way for the sake of our child. He had underestimated me. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in my chest. But now it had a hard, sharp edge. It was the edge of a weapon. I wasn't just going to expose him. I was going to take everything from him. His money, his reputation, his freedom. He and Sasha had built a house of cards on a foundation of my money and trust. I was about to become the hurricane that knocked it all down. My first call wasn't to a lawyer. It was to a man named Marcus Thorne, a forensic accountant I'd met through a client. He was known in certain circles as the Undertaker, a quiet, relentless man who found things people didn't want found. I met him in a drab coffee shop in Dorchester, far from the polished cafes of my neighborhood. He was a small, unassuming man in his late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. I laid it all out for him. The bank statements, the incorporation documents, the hotel charges. I told him every lie Liam had ever told me. He listened patiently, without judgment, occasionally making a note in a small leather-bound book. When I was finished, he looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum, "your fiancé is either very arrogant or very stupid. Usually it's both." "Can you follow the money?" I asked. "Can you find out exactly what this Triton company is for?" A thin smile touched his lips. "The money always tells a story," he said. "My job is to translate it. This will be expensive." "I don't care about the cost," I said, my voice hard as steel. "I want to know everything." As I left the coffee shop and walked back out into the bright Boston sunshine, I felt a shift inside me. The victim was gone. I was no longer the jilted fiancé. I was the architect of Liam Vance's destruction. He had started a war when he put my grandmother's locket around his mistress's neck. He just didn't realize that I was the one who was going to finish it. The weeks that followed were a quiet, cold war fought on two fronts. The first was legal and financial, a silent battle waged by Marcus Thorne from his anonymous office building. The second was personal, a daily struggle against the crushing weight of Liam's family and their social influence. Liam, realizing I wasn't going to come crawling back, had unleashed his lawyers. I was served with a stack of terrifying-looking documents. He was suing for full control of the brownstone, claiming he'd made the majority of the down payment. A lie. We had split it evenly. Worse, he filed a preliminary petition for paternal rights, one that painted me as emotionally unstable and sought to establish a custody arrangement that would give him control and me a pittance in child support. It was a classic power play, designed to intimidate me into submission. It was a message: "I am a Vance, we will crush you." His mother, Eleanor, was the social enforcer. Whispers followed me everywhere. Friends who had been lifelong allies suddenly stopped returning my calls. Invitations to events I was meant to attend dried up. I was systematically erased from the social calendar. At a charity luncheon I couldn't avoid, an old family friend pulled me aside, her face a mask of false sympathy. "Chloe, dear," she whispered, "everyone knows how difficult pregnancy can be on a woman's moods. Perhaps you should reconsider. A man like Liam doesn't stay on the market for long." They were closing ranks, protecting their own, pushing me out into the cold. I was being painted as the hysterical, ungrateful woman who had thrown away Boston's most eligible bachelor. Meanwhile, Liam and Sasha were photographed at the opening of a new gallery in the South End, smiling and holding hands. The caption in the society pages read, "Wealth manager Liam Vance and philanthropist Sasha Petrov, looking cozy." They were building their new public narrative on the rubble of my life. And they were doing it with my money. It should have broken me. Some days it almost did. I'd come home to the empty brownstone, the silence screaming at me, and feel a despair so deep it was hard to breathe. The baby would kick, a small, innocent life caught in the middle of this toxic battlefield, and I would weep, terrified of the future I was facing alone. But my resolve, born in that moment of humiliation at the shower, had taken root. It was a cold, hard thing in my chest, and it kept me going. I poured all my energy into my work, taking on new design projects with a ferocious focus. My clients' homes became my sanctuary, places where I could create order and beauty out of chaos. And I waited for Marcus Thorne to call. The call came on a rainy Tuesday in June. "I have something," was all he said. We met at the same dreary coffee shop. He slid a thin file across the table. It wasn't what I was expecting. "Triton Holdings Group," he began, "is a shell. On paper, it's a consulting firm. In reality, it's a pass-through." He explained that the money Liam had siphoned from our joint account was just the beginning. Liam had been advising several of his father's oldest clients, wealthy, trusting people who had known him since he was a boy, to invest in a private, high-yield offshore fund for tax diversification. This fund was, of course, a fiction. The money was wired to Triton, then immediately rerouted to a series of untraceable accounts in the Cayman Islands. Liam wasn't just stealing from me. He was running a Ponzi scheme, using his family's sterling reputation as cover. "He's defrauded at least 5 clients so far," Marcus said, tapping a list of names, "to the tune of about $4 million. I stared at the names on the list. I knew them all. The Laughtons, the Abernathys, the Winthrops. These were our friends. People who had been to our engagement party. People whose homes I had helped design. People Eleanor Vance smiled with at Gallus. And the worst part," Marcus continued, his voice low, "is who he learned it from. He pushed another document across the table. It was a brittle, yellowed newspaper clipping from a small Vermont paper, dated 30 years ago. The headline read, "Boston Financier Cleared in Real Estate Fraud Probe." The financier was Robert Vance, Liam's father. The article detailed how Robert had been the sole broker for a ski resort development that went bust, wiping out the life savings of dozens of small-town investors. He was investigated, but a key witness, his bookkeeper, mysteriously disappeared before she could testify. The charges were dropped for lack of evidence. "The sins of the father," Marcus murmured. "Your fiancé isn't a rogue agent. He's just the next generation of the family business." I felt a profound, chilling clarity. This wasn't just Liam, this was the Vances. Their entire empire, their social standing, their pristine reputation, it was all built on a foundation of lies and theft. They weren't just protecting their son, they were protecting themselves. They had a system, a playbook for making problems, and people disappear. The missing bookkeeper from 3 decades ago was a ghost whispering a warning in my ear. They thought I was just another problem they could sue, silence, and discard. They were wrong. This was no longer about a broken heart or a stolen locket. This was about justice. Not just for me, but for every person the Vances had ever swindled. The plan that began to form in my mind was audacious, dangerous, and required a skill set I already possessed. As an interior designer, I understood the power of a facade. I knew how to create an illusion of perfection. But more importantly, I knew how to find the load-bearing walls. I knew how to see the structural weaknesses that lay hidden behind the beautiful veneer. The Vance family had built an impenetrable fortress. I was about to show them that even fortresses have back doors. And for years they had been inviting me inside, showing me all the secret passages. I knew the secrets whispered in their drawing rooms, the vulnerabilities hidden behind their custom millwork. I had their trust. Or at least I'd had it. Now I was going to use it to burn their whole world to the ground. That evening, I went back to the brownstone and opened my laptop. I pulled up my client files, a decade's worth of intimate knowledge about Boston's elite. I wasn't looking for design plans. I was looking for cracks in the facade. I started with the Winthrops, one of the families Liam had defrauded. I had redesigned their entire Beacon Hill mansion 2 years ago. I remembered Mrs. Winthrop confessing to me over a cup of tea that her husband was a gambling addict and that they were living on the edge of financial ruin. Liam, their trusted financial advisor, would have known that. He had targeted them specifically because of their desperation. The Vances didn't just prey on the rich. They preyed on the weak. My fury became something cold and precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. I began to map out a new design. Not for a house, but for a downfall. And the centerpiece, the final touch, would be my grandmother's locket. I was going to get it back. But first, I was going to make it the instrument of their ruin. The strategy was simple. The Vances operated in the shadows, so I would have to as well. I became a ghost. I bought a burner phone and a laptop that could never be traced back to me, paying in cash at a nondescript electronics store out in Somerville. I started creating anonymous email accounts and encrypted social media profiles. I was building a new identity online, a phantom that could move through the digital world of Boston's elite without leaving a trace. My first target was their social foundation. Their power came from the perception of their peers, the carefully cultivated image of old money stability and unimpeachable integrity. I decided to introduce chaos into that ecosystem. I began with a simple, anonymous email to a notorious city gossip columnist. The email contained a single, juicy tidbit, a photograph I'd found on a misconfigured cloud server while working on a project, showing Arthur Lawton, another of Liam's victims and a man known for his staunch family values, in a compromising position with his personal trainer at his Cape Cod summer home. I didn't mention Liam. I didn't mention the fraud. I just lit a small fire and walked away. Within a week, the Lawtons were in a full-blown public marital crisis. The carefully ordered world of their social circle was thrown into disarray. Trust began to fray. I was planting seeds of discord, turning the members of the herd against each other so they would be too busy to notice the wolf circling. Next, I went after their business. Using the information from Marcus, I crafted another anonymous message, this time to the compliance officer at a rival investment bank. The message was vague but suggestive, hinting at irregularities in the Vance and Associates client portfolios, and mentioning the unusual performance of a certain offshore fund. It was just enough to trigger a mandatory internal review to put the scent of blood in the water for their competitors. It wouldn't bring them down, not yet, but it would start the process. It would force them to start hiding things, creating a paper trail of their own cover-up that Marcus and I could then follow. Liam felt the pressure. I heard through the grapevine that he was becoming erratic, paranoid. He and Sasha had moved into a lavish apartment in the seaport, but their picture-perfect life was starting to show cracks. They were seen arguing at a restaurant. He was drinking more heavily. The walls I was building around him were invisible, but he could feel them closing in. All the while, I was playing the part of the broken, grieving victim. In my few public appearances, I was quiet, withdrawn, focusing only on my pregnancy. I let them think they had won. I let them underestimate me. My biggest challenge and my most important goal was reclaiming my grandmother's locket. It had become a symbol of everything they had taken from me. Marcus hired a discreet private investigator, a former BPD detective named Costello, to track Sasha. She was predictable. She frequented the same high-end boutiques, the same yoga studio, the same brunch spots. And she wore the locket everywhere, a constant, glittering badge of her victory. We needed a way to get it from her, not through theft, but through manipulation. Costello's surveillance paid off. He discovered that Sasha, obsessed with status, was in the process of getting all her jewelry appraised for a new, larger insurance policy. She had an appointment scheduled at a private appraiser in the jeweler's building in downtown Crossing. This was my chance. The plan was surgical. Marcus, through a network of contacts, found a jeweler on the same floor as Sasha's appraiser who owed him a significant favor. For a hefty sum, the jeweler agreed to have an emergency and close his shop for the day. In his place would be a new specialist, a man Costello knew from his old life, an expert not in gems, but in sleight of hand. I also needed to get something inside the locket. While Liam had been spiraling, I had paid a visit to my family's old safe deposit box. In it, amongst my grandmother's papers, I found what I was looking for, her personal ledgers. My grandmother had been a quiet, unassuming woman, but she had been incredibly shrewd. She had also been a client of Robert Vance, Liam's father, back in the 80s. Her ledgers were meticulous, and on one page dated 1987 was an entry detailing a personal loan of $50,000 she had made to Robert for his Vermont development project, a loan for which she was promised a handsome return but was never repaid. It was the seed money for the very ski resort scam that had ruined dozens of other investors. She had even written a small note in the margin. Robert says the paperwork is just a formality. I trust him, but a record is a record. It was the smoking gun. It proved the Vance's corruption spanned generations. I had the page professionally photographed and shrunk down onto a piece of microfilm, a tiny, almost invisible speck. The day of Sasha's appointment was tense. Costello and I sat in a car across the street watching the entrance to the jeweler's building. Sasha arrived right on time, looking every bit the queen of her stolen kingdom. "She's going in," Costello grunted. Now it was all up to the specialist. The plan was for him to take the locket into the back room for a detailed examination. There, he would open it, swap the faded photo of my grandmother with the microfilm, and reseal it. The key was what he would tell Sasha. He wasn't just going to appraise it. He was going to plant a seed of doubt. An hour later, Sasha exited the building. She looked unsettled. Costello's phone buzzed. It was the specialist. "It's done," he said. "She bought it completely." He'd told Sasha that the locket was a very fine piece, but he'd found a loose setting near the clasp. He warned her that it was at risk of falling off and being lost. He recommended she have it repaired immediately by a master craftsman, and even gave her the name of a trusted colleague, a jeweler in Providence who was, of course, another of our assets. We had just turned my most precious possession into a time bomb, and Sasha was now hand-delivering it to the detonator. The next phase of the plan was in motion. I had targeted their social standing and their business. Now I was going to turn them against each other. Liam believed Sasha was his partner in crime, his ride-or-die accomplice. I was about to show him that her only real allegiance was to herself. 2 days later, an anonymous package arrived at Liam's office. Inside was a single high-resolution photograph. It was a picture of Sasha, taken by Costello, leaving the appraiser's office. On the back, a single sentence was typed, "She's getting ready to cash." Out. Are you? Liam would have no idea who sent it, but he would jump to the most obvious conclusion. One of their other victims was on to them. And the first thing he would see was his partner, the co-owner of their fraudulent company, getting their assets appraised. He would see it as a betrayal. He would believe she was preparing to cut a deal, save herself, and leave him to take the fall. The paranoia I had been nurturing for weeks would bloom into full-blown panic. Their criminal enterprise, like their relationship, was built on a foundation of lies. And now, I was going to enjoy watching them tear it apart, brick by gilded brick. The photograph had the exact effect I'd intended. The cracks in Liam and Sasha's united front shattered into a chasm. Costello's surveillance reported a massive, screaming fight at their apartment that night, the sound of breaking glass echoing into the hallway. The next day, Sasha was seen moving boxes out with the help of a professional moving company. Their perfect partnership had imploded in less than 48 hours. Liam, consumed by paranoia, made his first critical mistake. He began moving money, large sums, from the Triton accounts in the Caymans to a new personal account under a false name in Switzerland. He was building a golden parachute, preparing to flee. What he didn't know was that Marcus Thorne had anticipated this. The moment the offshore funds were touched, it triggered a series of international banking alerts that went directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the IRS. Liam thought he was covering his tracks, but he was actually painting a giant fluorescent arrow pointing directly at his guilt. While he was busy trying to save himself, Sasha was unwittingly walking into the final part of my trap. Terrified by the jeweler's warning that the precious locket, her trophy, could be lost, she drove to Providence to see the master craftsman we had arranged. The jeweler, a stern older man with an impeccable reputation, played his part perfectly. He examined the locket under a powerful magnifying glass, his brow furrowed with concern. Then he discovered something else. "Ma'am," he said, his voice grave, "there appears to be something lodged inside the locket's casing. It looks like some kind of film." Sasha, already on edge from her fight with Liam, panicked. She assumed Liam had hidden something incriminating on her, setting her up to be the fall guy. She insisted the jeweler remove it immediately. He carefully extracted the tiny piece of microfilm and projected it onto a screen for her. When the image of the ledger page appeared, detailing the 30-year-old fraud committed by Liam's father, Sasha saw her escape route. This wasn't just evidence against Liam. It was leverage against the entire Vance family. She took the microfilm and the locket and left the shop, her mind already racing. She saw a future where she could blackmail the Vances, securing her own fortune and leaving Liam to his fate. She had no idea that the evidence she now possessed was a Trojan horse, and that its final destination was exactly where I wanted it to be. The stage was now set for the final act. The Vances' annual charity gala, the Boston Heritage Ball, was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar. It was a night where the city's old money and new power converged to celebrate their own legacy, all under the benevolent leadership of the Vance family. It was their fortress, their throne room, and it was where I had decided to execute them. In the days leading up to the ball, I orchestrated the final moves with the precision of a military general. Marcus Thorne compiled his entire investigation, every illegal wire transfer, every fraudulent document, every offshore account, into a comprehensive file. A copy was prepared for the SEC, a copy for the U.S. Attorney's Office, and a copy for the Investigative Reporting Unit at the Boston Globe. They were all embargoed, set to be delivered and published at exactly 9 p.m. on the night of the gala. My sister Clara, who had been my silent, steadfast support through the entire ordeal, helped me prepare. She was the only person who knew the full extent of my plan. "Are you sure you want to be there?" she asked, her eyes full of worry, as she helped me zip up the deep emerald green dress I'd chosen. It was a warrior's color. "I have to be," I said, my voice steady. "I want to see their faces when the world they built comes crashing down." I arrived at the Boston Public Library, the venue for the gala, deliberately late. The magnificent Bates Hall was filled with the city's most powerful people, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The orchestra was playing, champagne was flowing, and at the center of it all stood Robert and Eleanor Vance, greeting guests with regal smiles. Liam was by their side, looking pale and strained, but trying desperately to maintain the facade of the charming heir apparent. He saw me enter, and for a moment his eyes widened in shock. I gave him a small, cold smile and walked past him without a word, moving through the crowd as if I belonged there. I saw Sasha across the room holding court near the bar. She was talking to Harrison Abernathy, another of Liam's victims. She was already putting her blackmail plan into motion, subtly testing the waters. She saw me, and a flicker of smug triumph crossed her face. She thought she held all the cards. She lifted her hand to her throat, her fingers touching the locket, a final, arrogant gesture of dominance. I found a quiet spot on the balcony overlooking the hall and waited. At 8:55 p.m., I sent a single text message to a dozen people in the room, the very clients Liam had defrauded. It was an anonymous message from my burner phone, containing a simple link to a password-protected website I had created. The website contained one thing: the digital copy of Marcus Thorne's full report on the Vance family's Ponzi scheme. The password was a single word: grandmother. At precisely 9:00 p.m., a low murmur began to ripple through the crowd. Phones started lighting up one by one. Faces turned from polite smiles to masks of shock and fury. Harrison Abernathy, who had been listening to Sasha's pitch, looked down at his phone, his face turning ashen. He looked from his screen to Liam, then to Robert, his eyes burning with the fire of betrayal. At the same time, the first alerts from the Boston Globe's breaking news app started buzzing across the room. The headline was stark: Vance and Associates accused of multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, spanning generations. The story, complete with copies of documents from Marcus's report, spread through the hall like a virus. The music faltered and then stopped. A terrible, charged silence fell over the grand room. Eleanor Vance's smile froze on her face. Robert's face went white. Liam looked around frantically, like a cornered animal. And then, as if on cue, the grand doors to Bates Hall swung open. 2 men in dark suits walked in, followed by a half-dozen uniformed officers. They weren't gala guests. They were federal agents. One of the agents walked directly up to Robert and Liam. "Robert Vance? Liam Vance?" he said, his voice calm but carrying in the dead silence. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering." The sound of Eleanor Vance's horrified gasp was the only sound in the room. Flashbulbs from the press, who had been tipped off and were waiting outside, began to erupt at the doorway. As the agents cuffed Liam, his wild, desperate eyes found mine across the room. There was no hatred in them, no anger, only a look of pure, uncomprehending shock. He truly had never seen it coming. He had thought I was a casualty. He never imagined I could be the cause. Sasha tried to slip away in the chaos, but 2 other agents intercepted her near the exit. Her face crumpled in disbelief as they informed her she was being detained as a material witness and co-conspirator. The last I saw of her, she was being led away, her face a tear-streaked mask of terror. The locket, my locket, was still around her neck, a golden witness to her spectacular self-destruction. The Vance dynasty had crumbled in the space of 10 minutes, in front of the very people they had built their reputation on impressing. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was a quiet, systemic, and total annihilation. I turned and walked out of the library, leaving the wreckage behind me. I didn't look back. 6 months later, I was sitting in the nursery of my new home, a sun-drenched condo in Cambridge overlooking the Charles River that I had bought and designed myself. The late autumn light streamed through the windows, falling on the soft, pale yellow walls and the simple, elegant crib in the corner. In my arms, my daughter Grace slept soundly, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The world of the Vances felt like a distant, half-forgotten nightmare. Robert and Liam had both taken plea bargains to avoid a long, drawn-out trial that would have aired even more of their family's dirty laundry. Robert, due to his age and health, received a sentence of 5 years in a low-security federal prison. Liam, the architect of the more recent scheme, was sentenced to 15. Their assets were seized to pay restitution to the victims. The Vance name, once a symbol of Boston Brahmin prestige, was now synonymous with disgrace. Sasha, in a desperate attempt to save herself, had tried to use the microfilm as a bargaining chip. But the authorities already had the original ledger from me. Her leverage was worthless. She was charged as a co-conspirator, and after a short trial was found guilty. Her sentence was lighter than Liam's, but her reputation and social standing were gone forever. The Vance estate, including the brownstone I had once called home, was sold at auction. Their entire world had been liquidated. Eventually got the locket back. It was returned to me in a sterile plastic evidence bag from the U.S. Attorney's Office. The first thing I did was take it to an honest jeweler, who carefully removed the microfilm and replaced it with the tiny, faded photograph of my smiling grandmother. It felt clean again, purified. Holding it in my hand now, its familiar weight felt different. It was no longer just a link to my past, but a symbol of my strength. It was a reminder that the best parts of me, my grandmother's resilience, my mother's grace, my own quiet determination, were things no one could ever take away. Grace stirred in my arms, her little mouth curving into a sleepy smile. I looked down at her perfect, innocent face, and my heart felt so full I thought it might burst. The war was over. I had won. I had not only survived, I had triumphed. I had protected my child, reclaimed my future, and served a cold, meticulous justice to the people who had tried to destroy me. I leaned back in the rocking chair, the locket cool against my skin, my daughter warm in my arms, and watched the sun set over the city. He thought the locket was just a piece of jewelry, but it was a key. And a promise. The end.